On a quiet stretch of coastline where the sand was soft and pale as moonlight, there stood a small white cottage facing the sea. The waves rolled in gently each day, whispering stories to the shore. And at night, the stars shimmered over the water like scattered silver coins. In that little cottage lived a woman named Marina. She had lived by the ocean all her life and could not imagine being anywhere else. Her days were simple. She brewed tea in the mornings, mended her fishing nets, and walked barefoot along the beach to collect shells washed in by the tide. Her favorite time of day was dusk, when the world turned blue and gold. The sea would quiet, the gulls would settle, and the wind would soften until the only sound was the rhythmic sigh of the waves. In those moments, Marina felt that the ocean was speaking directly to her, not in words, but in a language of sound and silence. One evening, after a storm had passed, Marina walked down to the beach to see what the waves had left behind. The sand was cool beneath her feet, damp and smooth, and the air smelled of salt and rain. She found driftwood, a few broken shells, and the tangled remains of seaweed glistening under the fading light. But as she walked farther down the shore, she saw something half buried in the sand, something unlike any shell she had ever seen. It was large, smooth, and pearly white, with faint silver lines spiraling toward its center. When she picked it up, it felt warm, as if it had been waiting just for her. She held it close to her ear, as she always did with shells, expecting to hear the familiar echo of the sea. But this time, what she heard was different. At first, it was faint, a hum, soft and low. Then it grew into something clearer, like music made of wind and water, distant but alive. It wasn't just the ocean, it was a song. Marina stood there, motionless, as the melody filled her mind. It was gentle and full of longing, like a lullaby carried across the waves. She closed her eyes and listened. Her hot days passed. She began to notice something strange. When she listened to the shell, her dreams grew clearer. In them, she walked under the sea, not swimming, but moving as if the water had turned to air. Around her glowed soft lights, like the reflections of stars beneath the surface. Voices sang from far away, their tones weaving in and out like currents. She never saw who sang them, but she felt safe, deeply, peacefully safe. Each morning when she awoke, the sea outside seemed to greet her differently, as if it too remembered the dreams. One afternoon, an old fisherman named Jonas came to visit. He often stopped by to trade stories and drink tea. When he saw the shell on her table, his eyes widened. "Where did you find that?" he asked, leaning closer. "By the rocks after the storm," she said. "It sings." Jonas grew quiet. "A singing shell, you say? My grandmother used to tell stories about those. Said they come from the sea spirits. Gifts for those the ocean favors." Marina smiled, though she wasn't sure she believed such things. "It's just a shell," she said softly. but it feels alive." Jonas nodded. "The old tales say the sea remembers kindness. Maybe it remembers you." That night, after Jonas left, she lit a candle and sat by the window. The sea was calm, glowing silver under the moonlight. She lifted the shell and listened again. The song returned, clearer now, filled with harmonies that shimmered like moonlight. It was beautiful beyond words, and tears filled her eyes. But beneath the beauty, she sensed something else, a calling. The next day, Marina walked farther along the beach than she ever had before. The tide was low, revealing black rocks slick with seaweed. She followed the sound she thought she heard, faint notes echoing in her mind. Finally, she reached a small cove, hidden behind a curve of cliffs. The air was cool and still. Pools of clear water reflected the sky. She knelt by one of the pools and saw her reflection ripple across the surface, and behind it, something glowing faintly beneath the water. When she reached down, her fingers brushed something smooth, another shell, smaller than That night, she dreamed again, but this time it felt different. She was standing on the ocean floor, surrounded by drifting light. The shells in her hands began to glow, and the song swelled all around her, vast and tender, as if the sea itself were singing. And then she saw them, figures made of shimmering light, moving like currents. They weren't human, but they weren't frightening. They circled her gently, their eyes bright and full of calm. "You have listened," one of them said, though the words came like music. "And now you remember." "Remember what?" Marina asked. "That you are part of the sea. You always have been." She reached out, and the light brushed against her fingers, warm as sunlight through water. When she awoke, her pillow was damp, not with tears, but with salt. In the days that followed, Marina began to change, not in a way anyone else could see, but in a way she could feel. She could sense the tides before they shifted. She knew when storms were coming by the tone of the wind, and every night as she fell asleep, she heard the song, steady, soft, endless. Sometimes she wondered if she was becoming part of the ocean itself. Jonas noticed too. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, he said quietly, "You look different these days. Happier, as if you've found something the rest of us have forgotten." Marina smiled faintly. "Maybe I have," she said. She didn't tell him that sometimes when she walked along the shore, the waves seemed to curve toward her, brushing her ankles like an old friend. Years passed. The cottage weathered storms and summers alike. Travelers came and went, often stopping by to buy shells or listen to Marina's stories of the sea. And always the great white shell sat by her window. Some swore they could hear it singing when the wind blew from the east. Marina grew older, her hair silver as the foam on the waves, but her eyes remained bright, the color of deep water under sunlight. One evening, as twilight fell and the horizon turned violet, she walked down to the beach one last time. She carried both shells with her. The sea was calm, glowing faintly beneath the first stars. She stood at